Greetings, everyone. My name is DJ Wells, and you've tuned in to our weekly web broadcast, Coping with COVID, where each week we talk about those things that we're dealing with as a result of the pandemic. Today, we've got an important conversation, one that Dr. Mensah actually has some personal stake in. He was very adamant about wanting to make sure that we cover this topic, and that topic being suicide prevention in light of what's going on with the pandemic. We're joined today by Mr. Mark Hattas. Mark is a staff member from Journey's Dream, an organization that specializes in mental health advocacy. And so the two of them will share their insights about what's going on today as it relates to mental health, suicide prevention specifically, and the pandemic. I want to remind all of you that this is an interactive activity. We encourage you to send in your questions as the conversation is going on. If you're watching on a computer, at the bottom of your screen, there should be a tab that says Q&A. Click on that tab, type in your questions. If you're watching on a tablet or a phone, that tab might be at the top of your phone, at the top of your screen. But either way, send in your questions. After about 30-45 minutes, we'll get those questions to Dr. Mensah and to Mr. Hattas. And so without further ado, let me hand things over to Dr. Mensah. Dr. Mensah, as always, thank you. Mark, thank you for joining us as well. Dr. Mensah, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. Mark, we are very pleased to have you. And I just want to correct one little thing here. Mr. Hattas was a very decisive force in putting together Journey's Dream. Mark, if you would care to share with us, share with everyone, what Journey's Dream is, how this came about, and please, I know it's of course, a very difficult subject, but if you wouldn't mind, certainly just share with us all, please.
Yeah, it's so Journey's Dream is a support hub, and the idea behind it was created for people who are struggling with a mental illness or have a loved one and wanted to find solutions, resources that believed in their full restorative health. And it was launched by myself and three co-founders from two very different angles. I had built and sold a tech company, went through a bipolar mania experience in 2011. And after a week in the hospital was told, there's no cure for this and plan on being on these medications the rest of your life. And for about 3 years, I was seeking alternative solutions to that narrative, to that belief structure. And my third hospitalization was 2014, which resulted actually in a suicide attempt because I was terrified of myself. I didn't trust myself. I was afraid I was going to hurt somebody or do something to cause harm to my family, and thought that was going to be the safest thing for them. And my co-founders, and after that, by the way, I decided if I'm going to be on the planet and live, I'm actually going to live. And I went and told my doctor I needed to find some other resources. And my wife actually found this really, cool guy out in Warrenville named Dr. Albert Mensah. And I was introduced to to your services as well as some others that really supported my full restorative process. In parallel with that, Mitzi and Rex Montague Bauer were dealing with their son, and Brea, her brother. His name's Journey. And Journey was an all-star student at the University of Michigan. He was attacked by a gang one night of, kids, thugs. They're not really sure. And they don't know exactly what happened, but he started to exhibit schizophrenic behaviors after that and really changed. And he was hospitalized about 9 times And finally, in an effort to apparently fly, which sounds maybe silly to some people, but he thought that if he could levitate and fly, that he could do anything, including heal. And so he walked off a 6-story building and died. And his suicide was, like so many, it just tore the family apart for a little bit. But the cool thing about this family is they turned it into action, and they joined with me. They really had hoped that they could have found resources like what I had found, and they had committed to, hey, let's create this resource hub so people can find things quickly that work.
Thank you, Mark. Really an amazing testimony. We have not just one individual and one family who did something with the potential of tragedy. We had 2. And how you guys found each other, divine intervention, is an amazing, amazing concept. And folks, let me share with you, if you're familiar with Soldiers Field in Chicago, Mark was instrumental in getting together with the powers that be to basically bring the entire first publicized program of of Journey's Dream to Soldiers Field. So on the big screen where normally we would see football scores, we had the discussion, the journey itself of Journey's Dream, and the conversation around suicide, around mental health challenges, but most importantly, not from a traditional perspective. Now, folks, this doesn't mean alternative medicine. What we're talking about is comprehensive approaches to a problem, a situation. As we've discussed before, right now what we're trying to do at Mensah Medical is work with therapists, work with other practitioners, work with psychologists and psychiatrists to broaden the scope of treatment, to make it multidimensional for every patient that comes in or that we talk to, whether they're in Chicago or California or Florida or wherever have you. But it's extremely important relative to what Mark is talking about here. And he didn't specifically mention it, but time. Time is a factor here. Unfortunately, with regard to Journey, we weren't able to get to him quickly enough. Processes were started, but before they could take root, well, he moved on. And what was instrumental in Mark's heart was the idea of having strong numbers of resources available in a timely fashion to help individuals who are seeking help. So, Mark, can you tell us a bit about sort of the structure around your organization and how individuals, normally we do this at the end, right? But I want people to know this up front. What is sort of the program process around finding, a good therapist, a good treatment program? And share with us, please, the different types of programs that you have available that you're referring to and so forth.
Yeah, of course. So there are multiple things that we're doing, and thank you for all that. And just to be clear to people watching, though Mitzi and Rex wish they would have known you, Journey never actually did any work with you. That would have been wonderful, and that's what they wanted. The things that they had found, they had hoped for, but it just, like you said, there wasn't the time element. And one of the things I've heard from people who have attempted to take their life, is on the other side of it very quickly. If they fail, there's often a sense of relief. I think that was the case for me. It's the case with a lot, not everybody. But when people, to answer your question directly, when people come to Journey's Dream, we have a podcast as well. We have interviewed 20, 25, different leaders in the space. You're one of them, Dr. Mensah, and it's a great interview on there. And so one is just education. Another is a resource hub that is still being developed and flushed out. We've got, I think it's a few hundred or so resources in there, but essentially the idea is enter a zip code, postal code, and be able to find people in your area. And they're not all psychologists, psychiatrists. It can be, different kinds of practitioners that could come at it from a spiritual lens. It could be a massage therapist. It could be whatever it is that's going to be of service to that person in the moment. There are centers, that have retreat kind of environments where people can go for, weeks or a month at a time, and really, get that kind of care. So that's an element of it. And then from a program standpoint, and what I would say is at the heart of it, and this is critical because I think this is a big miscomponent, because you can do a lot with the body, right? You can do a lot to build the vitality of the body and correct like the magic that you guys do. But if we don't address someone reconnecting with who they are, they are divided inside. If someone's dealing with any kind of mental illness, there's some kind of dividedness inside. And I love the story of the apple tree that it feels a sense that it's not good enough because it looks on the rose bush and sees how beautiful the roses are and feels inadequate, right? And starts to divide from the beauty of what it is. And unfortunately, humanity has done that again and again and again, and it shows up in different ways. It doesn't have to be called a mental illness, but it is. As soon as someone lies to themselves at first that they're not good enough, or that they're not able to, right? We're lying to ourselves. And so the restoration of health, part of it comes from reconnecting with the truth of who we are. And to reconnect with the truth of who we are, there's a process to re-educate, reorient the brain, let go of some of the things that it had believed to be true that just aren't, and don't need to going forward. And that program that we create is called Optimal Being. And it's online at optimalbeing.live, and it's and through Journey's Dream. And it's a phenomenal systematic approach to helping people reorient their lives. We've seen, young people, old people, all kinds of, different walks of life. And it's not just people with a mental health challenge. I mean, professionals, the people who are supposedly thriving, who might have an interruption, maybe a divorce is happening or something is surfacing in their life, the loss of a job, COVID-19, these kinds of things are occurring. And these kinds of programs can help, again, reorient people into more of an optimal state and really get connected with a guidance system in them that'll lead to happiness and well-being.
Healing.
Healing.
Healing in all of its potential parameters. You talk about healing of the spirit, and that's one of the things that we don't have time to, in the medical world, worry about. It's about, let's heal the body, let's placate the brain, let's blindfold it so that it doesn't see what the problem looks like through traditional pharmaceuticals or other interventions that don't really fix the underlying problem. And this is what we want to share with people so that they know, so they understand that there are multimodal, pluripotential opportunities that don't involve necessarily traveling. Mark, the idea that this thing is online for people to be able to access, that's huge, that's powerful. That's a very big starting point for people. And so I'm glad you brought that up. Mark, can you tell us a little bit more about some of the other practitioners, a little bit more in depthly, that are out there for people to look to access? So,
The specifics practitioners or the types of?
Without names, just the types of.
Okay, got it. One of the practitioners that, let's just talk about psychology, for example. So there are lots of psychologists out there. And one of the things that I've seen is that psychologists who are really on it, they fully believe in the full restoration of someone's health. And there are others that believe the storyline that it's not an option. You know, it really is unlikely. And what we have are people who believe that people can be restored, and they have tools and resources to do that, and a track record. So there's an element of confidence just in that role of psychologist, right? That to weed, if I'm going to find a psychologist, I'm going to find someone who believes in my full restoration of health. Mm-hmm. And anything else to me is unacceptable. And so if someone is a psychologist, that means one of two things. You know, either they can choose to move toward that if they don't believe it, you know, or over time, I think what's going to happen is they're going to have a shrinking pool of people as the evolution of the mindset in the country and in the globe shifts from one that people can't get well to one that, hey, maybe people can, and maybe they can consistently. So that's one, would obviously be the psychologist. There's one who you met at Soldiers of Hope, who is actually an anesthesiologist, and he does something called a ganglion block for PTSD, which I find to be fascinating. Mm-hmm. And within 30, 40 minutes or so of a procedure, someone can go from a PTSD unhealthy state to a pre-PTSD state. And the challenge is it's not sustainable usually with the first treatment. That first treatment might last 2 to 6 months. But on the second treatment, that usually lasts up to a couple years or so. And what that buys somebody is time, you know, because if someone's in PTSD, their nerves are just on fire. And it buys somebody time to do the reorientation internally, you know, to maybe move into a process that can support facing some of the traumas that are creating the edge of this, you know, energy. And so that's a kind of a different, unusual thing, right? There's also, I'm trying to think of a way to say this, but our program is pretty mainstream, but there's some pretty, I guess, more out there kind of things. You know, meditation's pretty mainstream and things like that, but there are pretty significant retreats, you know, intensives that we have directed some people to, or not directed, but informed people of. And it just depends on the person and what their interest level is. But the value of an intensive would be to go through a curriculum and program that supports that inner look. I went on a 9-day intensive back in 2012, so shortly after my hospitalization, several months. And it was extraordinary. And there's a gentleman who has been putting these on for a long time who teaches, you know, core human dynamics that support transformation happening quickly. And again, it's not to heal anybody, but people who go through it find that they shift and change. One woman who crawled to the intensive, she was so overweight, and so her knees couldn't support her weight. So she crawled from her apartment to the cab to get to the airport and made her way there. What's interesting is over the course of 9 days, she lost 50 pounds, which is, I think, medically impossible. And so we started asking, like, well, what happened there? And she could walk, and, you know, she came alive. It's like, well, what happened? And the theory was that the cellular structure, when it's filled with trauma, almost crystallizes and hardens. And that when that starts to open up and release, that it just, the mass changes. And it sounds so strange, but, and I'm not a scientist, so I couldn't tell you anything more than what I just shared, because it was just, we were hypothesizing. But stuff happens that can be only attributed to someone looking at something that was one way, shifting perception and allowing, you know, something in the body just changes. And that happens on a pretty regular basis.
Mark, with regard to the ganglion block situation, have you had a lot of veterans come to you? with PTSD for these kinds of referrals, recommendations?
So it's interesting. I wouldn't say we've had a lot of veterans, coming, and I think that part of that is there are so many resources that are really marketing and promoting to veterans, and we haven't done quite that level of integration. So we have some relationships with some veteran organizations, but I do know that a predominant client base, of the anesthesiologist I was referencing does deal with veterans, and he's brought it to, Department of Defense, and they've done some studies, and it's a very effective resource.
And
I'm happy to share it if anyone wants to reach out.
Oh, absolutely. We want people to know about this because, Mark, we see a lot of veterans, okay, and they're coming in for PTSD, and while I don't want to cause any trouble with the military, certainly, a lot of the things these young people have been through is not always quite so well addressed within the confines of the military itself.
Right.
And so for them to have these opportunities to find these kind of individuals, these novel therapeutic approaches, and I remember speaking to the doctor who does this, it's a really innovative piece. And as you said, it doesn't always have to be the final fix. If you can buy months or even a few years of capacity to arrive at that point of healing, then that's a great thing, because most of these folks degenerate very quickly. And I don't mean as in becoming, horrible citizens of the world. They deteriorate, I should say, not degenerate, deteriorate. Everything from their bodies to their minds to their souls and their spirits. And at that point, a lot of these folks have families. There's somebody's husband, there's somebody's dad, and there's somebody's son or daughter. And for them, the family members are trying to understand, and they can't understand because they haven't been through it. Right. And the person who's been traumatized can't really explain it. And in part, that's why there's such a very tight bond amongst military personnel. They're talking to people who've been through it. They can identify, they bonded over that. So this is a very, very important topic to us, because quite a few people, have come in looking for these answers. And while we can help work with foundational chemistry, we can't help heal that spirit directly. We have to find these other resources, and that's what we're really about. Trying to find those opportunities for individuals to find these adjunctive pieces to take them to the next step, the next level. Okay.
Well, and there are some things. I wanted to share two real quick examples. There was a gentleman who was struggling with PTSD because he was trying to remember the year now, but there was an attack in Mumbai, and he was staying at the Taj Mahal, I guess it was, and he was, or the Taj Hotel, whatever that hotel was, and he was in a restaurant eating dinner when machine gun fire shot up all the windows, and he and the people he was dining with ducked down, ran through the kitchen out to the street as chaos, gunfire and explosions, all kinds of stuff was happening. And he was running down to this river walk. So they were going down the stairs to the river walk, and someone said, no, wait, let's go this other way. And they went the other way. They ended up being safe. Turns out that river walk, whoever was doing the attack, they had lined it with mines. So had they run there, they would have died. And so he had shared that he hadn't slept since the event, and this was 12, 18 months later. He hadn't slept more than 2-3 hours because, again, his brain was just on fire. And I had learned a technique at the time, again, not to cure anything, but just to provide some level of sanity and relief. And if you can't sleep, it's hard to heal. So we met at a Starbucks, and in about 45 minutes, we actually walked through that event doing what's called a whole brain posture. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's essentially where you cross your ankles and then cross your wrist and create a connection, and it activates the corpus callosum, which gives somebody access to the other hemisphere that they might have been locked out of. And as he is talking through the story and feeling the emotion, the critical part is he was breathing while he was sharing, right? So he was staying in the breath, allowing his emotions to be there, and going into the memory of it. And as he went into the memory of it, in that whole brain posture, after about 4 to 5 minutes, something shifted. And it always happens. There's a physical, mental, or emotional shift. If someone really breathes and feels and allows the memory to come up, the brain kind of like, okay, got it. He texted me the next morning, or no, it was that night because he went back and slept. He said, I just slept for 7 hours. It was the first time I had 7 hours of sleep, since that time. And it was life transformative, right? A simple little thing like that, can be transformative. Now, I don't know that he didn't struggle with the memories again, right? But little things, if we can just do little things. Another story, a young person came to me and told me that he wanted to kill himself. And one of the things, and didn't say it that way looking for help, but they had actually this person was saying it in passing. They would say, I just want to kill myself. And so instead of ignoring it, which is something that some people are uncomfortable, well, what do you do in that situation? And we had a conversation. I said, well, what do you think would happen? So because the key is no judgment. Like, it's no judgment, an open platform. If someone's really struggling and they're feeling really low, listen. They want someone to listen to them, who's not going to judge them and call the paramedics or, go off the handle, but who can really be present. And if it's someone you care about, it can be even tougher. So there's an element of letting go of attachment to the outcome a little bit. Again, not as a healthcare provider, but just as a concerned loved one, letting go of the outcome and being present. And so I asked him, what do you think would happen if you took your life? And the response was, everything will just be better. And I said, well, what do you mean better? And he goes on to describe his perception of, call it the afterlife. And I just listened and I said, well, that's interesting. I said, but what if you're wrong? And he looked at me and said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, what if it's more like this? And I gave him just a different scenario. So what if actually the opportunity is that the struggles you're working through, you get to here? Not that you have to deal with the struggle, but you get to, like, there's another side of it, that allows you to work through things here while you're in a body. And there was a little more to the conversation, but it got to a place where it felt complete, right? And then we parted ways. The next day, I saw this young person and he looked at me and said, hey, I just wanted you to know I decided to stay. And notice what happened. He decided to stay. Right? No one said, oh, we got to protect you and lock you in your room and do this so that you can't have access to anything, so you can't hurt yourself. It was to really, if we listen to people, if we open up and really listen to what they're going through and what they're dealing with, and really be that reflective, loving support, oftentimes the answer is in what they're telling us. Mm-hmm. The thing that they most need, people are going to ask for, they're going to call out in some way. Most people who have suicidal ideation tell somebody. They're letting somebody know that there's something going on. So those are just two examples, one with the PTSD and one with the topic of the suicide, that there are solutions. Not a single solution is everyone's solution. And even though you may not be an expert out there, if you can be human in the moment. And being human in the moment means letting go of all your fears and insecurities and the things that you think are supposed to happen, etc., and be a human being and love in the presence of the person you're with, and magic can happen. It's quite remarkable.
That's powerful, Mr. Hattas. Extremely powerful. You know, you bring out the idea of listening, right? Quite often what we have in the systems that deal with suicidal individuals is not really listening or hearing, depending on how you want to look at it. Maybe we're listening for the clues that say, do we pencil them in for suicide watch? Do we pencil them in for being taken off to a hospital? Do we pencil them in for, okay, it's okay to pass the buck on to mom and dad. It's okay, he's not or she's not going to do anything right now. But we're, no pun intended, we're missing the mark here with regard to how we process this information, how we process what this person is really trying to say. And the story is a very moving one, Mark, of getting to really letting that person share with you the core. And I agree with you. So often people are really giving signals in their way they're trying to communicate that something's wrong. Most of us are so busy during the course of our time that until it gets serious and there's already been an attempt, nobody pauses to ask certain questions. No one pauses to really be sort of in the moment with that individual. Mr. Wells, we had an individual who contacted us, it was actually, I think, within the last week or so.
That's correct.
Who basically, would you mind sharing that, Mr. Wells, what the message actually said?
When we did our webcast, I think it was 2 weeks ago, regarding autism and the pandemic and some of the struggles that autistic patients were facing. Someone put in the comments section of that, I'm adult and autistic and I feel so alone. And that's all that they put in the comments section. And at that point, at your recommendation, Dr. Mensah, we sent a response back saying, there's no need to feel alone. How can we help? What can we do? But again, to Mr. Hattas, to your point, just letting folks know that there are folks that are there to listen sometimes is the most important first step.
Now, I want to preference this. Mr. Wells had no idea I was going to put him on the spot just now and ask him that question. And I didn't prompt him any way other than simply saying, do you remember the message that we got? And that's how impactful what this person did was for us. This is an adult autistic. Imagine the life they've been through, the difficulties, the challenges, the frustrations, and they're asking for help. So yes, immediately we said, this is someone we've got to get a reference to. We didn't say this is somebody we've got to get in as a patient. Right. We said, how can we help you? And that's the message that we sent out. How can we guide you? How can we direct you? And life will move on, hopefully very appropriately. So there's a growth, a change that's happening, not just in this country, but really around the world, with regard to how people, practitioners, physicians, and hopefully more physicians are seeing how we need to proceed in the world of healing. Getting back to the idea of being a healer as opposed to simply a doctor or a psychologist or a therapist or a massage person or whatever have you. All of these modalities serve a purpose and are guided and directed for the one purpose of healing the individual. And so this is why, Mark, again, we're so excited really to have you here to talk about these things, because so many people are alone. I mean, look at where we are right now. Social isolation is the idea, although many folks aren't doing it. We won't get into that. But with this whole COVID thing, people have gotten very, very anxious. Many people have gotten very depressed many individuals are by themselves. Family dynamics are not necessarily good. They're not, married. They're not engaged. They don't have a significant other. They may have some companions by way of telephone resources or well, face communication that we have now. We didn't grow up with this, so it's all new to us. But it's still very lonely. And there are those who are sitting back wondering, when is this going to end? I already had some difficult challenges, and now I sit in a place where I start to contemplate exactly what you said, Mark. I wonder how life is on the other side. I think life might be really cool, out of this body, away from all the cares that I've got, and it could turn out this way, this way, this way, and this way. And then they start to ruminate about it. And then who knows what that next step is, and we hope it's not leading to something horrifically detrimental and transitional. But the idea that there's somebody around who can say, I hear what you're saying, but what if you're wrong? Mark, that's one of the few times I've actually heard someone relay a story about that. And we've seen tons of people, unfortunately, who've had suicidal ideation. And many family members, parents, family, friends, don't know really what to say. They're just trying to listen and figure it out. But very few come out and say, well, listen, I get it, but what if it's not that way? And then empowering that individual, working with that person to kind of let them find their way through, guarded, supported, and come to the point where they say, you know what, I changed my mind. I think I'm going to stay. I'm not going to forget that story, Mark. It's amazing. It's amazing. Mark, with the whole COVID-19 scenario and with the social isolating, have you seen an increase in people searching through your site or contacting you at all?
So we've seen a significant increase in people dealing with, obviously, a situation that is very different and new. And a couple of situations that have arisen in the recent past. There was a young man who had actually been dating and enjoying life in that way, and his parents are older, and he was very concerned about that particular part of his life, and he was feeling morose, I think is the word. And the shift for him was letting go of the way it was. Because what we're seeing happen with a lot of people is they get depressed, feeling like there's something that's not right, that should be a certain way, but it's not a certain way, or anxious that the future is going to look, in his case, like the present, like it wasn't ever going to end. And so what we found is if people can identify what is it that they want, in his case, he wanted to date. He wanted to be able to go out and come back home and not worry about his parents getting COVID and dying, which was his fear and theirs. But once he let go, once he said, you know what, I let go of my need to have it be the way it was. Something really cool happens when a person does that. And the resistance that can come up in people is, well, I don't want to let go of the way I want it, right? I want that. But that reinforces the emotional turmoil. By letting go, it actually frees it. So when he said, I let go of my attachment to it being the way that it was in his dating life, and he was able to breathe and feel the emotional sensations in his body. And the cool thing about emotions, and I wish I could quote the scientist who came up with this, but I heard that an emotion lasts about 90 seconds. So if you're feeling an intense emotion, if you can breathe and just feel it, notice the sensations in the body, in the neck, the throat, wherever, just notice the sensations. and feel it, in about 90 seconds, it's going to pass. That whole brain posture we talked about earlier can actually, help it move even quicker. But what occurred then, once he felt the emotional release, is he had an inspiration. And he realized that what he could do, because he lives in the mountains, is he could go and explore these mountains in a different way. And he could really discover what it was that he wanted to do, and he started to open up to what was possible rather than what he was missing. Mm-hmm. And so that's something that we're seeing consistently. That's one story, and I could share a lot more, but I won't, because they're all very similar in terms of the concept. Identify what you want. That's the cause of your upset, the trigger of your stress. Let go of attachment to it having to be that way. Breathe, feel the emotions, and then in that state, like as you calm down, then check in. It's like, okay, now what is it that from this calmer, more loving state, what's optimal? And every single time someone does it, they're going to receive an insight in some way. Go for a run or make a meal or call a friend or whatever it is, but they'll receive something that they most need. And that's where we start to teach people how to trust their intuition. But that's critical. If there's one thing that people going through this time, because we can't change what is, there's an isness to what's happening. If I'm going to go to the grocery store, I'm going to wear a mask to go inside. That's kind of the rules to be able to shop at that grocery store, right? So that's the isness of it. The interaction inside us is where we can get pretty messed up in terms of our mind sending thoughts that can be non-ideal. Because if I hate the idea that I have to wear a mask and I hold on to this resentment as I'm going into the store, what's my demeanor going to be like? How am I going to interact with people? Who is it that is going to be the brunt of my aggression, if that resentment grows? But the only reason that's there is because I need it to be the way it was. I need to go to the store without a mask, for example. It's like, well, if I can let go of that, now I can have more constructive choices available to me that wouldn't be available with anger and resentment or fear or whatever, one of those emotions that is out of alignment with joy and love.
Mark, I would like you to please refresh us on exactly what your background is.
Okay. Going back to like education.
Well, professionally.
Yeah.
You're a tech guy.
I'm an engineer by education, electrical engineering, and I went out of school into sales and then started a software company. And we built custom software for the likes of Blue Cross Blue Shield and Mercer, Redbox companies in the Chicagoland area, and built it to about 20 million and 150 people or so with my partner and some great people around us, and sold it in 2010. And then it was 9 months later that I went through the mental health situation. And through that process, as I discovered that there's a way to actually get healthy. And I saw that it wasn't like I was unique. I mean, this is something that anybody could do in my experience, at least if they're cognitively functional, that they can learn and apply certain principles. They can move from a state of disorientation in their life to one that's really aligned. And so, yeah, I was an entrepreneur and tech educated, learned through, the school of running a company, how a business worked, and through circumstances found this. And there's nothing that I would rather do in my life. Honestly, the greatest thing that ever happened for me in terms of my top 5 list in my life, besides marriage and kids and things like that, one of the number one things I'd put on that list would be having the mental health breakdown. It helped me shift from being out of touch with the truth of who I was to being fully aligned with who I am. And there's so much more joy, so much more passion. And I've seen, lots and lots of people go through the process of healing and really being restored. It's amazing. And it does take a disciplined approach. I mean, it takes the body being healthy. What you do is critical. Without what you do, I would have had a different path. It wouldn't have been as easy. But without the inner work, I would have also had a different path, and I wouldn't be as clear as I am today and as on target with my mission and purpose in life.
Thank you, Mark. What I wanted to illustrate to everybody who's going to watch this discussion is that you don't come from a background of therapy in terms of a professional license. You don't come from a background of psychology, of medicine, or whatever have you. You come from a very interesting background, because I'm not going to talk about your chemistry, but most people who've got your background are highly undermethylated individuals who tend to be very black and white, don't see the gray very easily, very, very, very controlled, and quite the opposite. They have a hard time letting go of who they are and how they function, and get very flustered and challenged when they can't let go to navigate these new waters. And to hear you speak, knowing that your background is not in psychology, not in therapy, it talks about how far you've come. And it also illustrates that anyone can move through this same process that you have by having access to the right people, having access to a multidisciplinary approach to folks who can really sort of help you move through this. Mark, there's always a certain level of peace around you as you speak and as we talk periodically. And I want to thank you for those stories, true stories, for the conversation, for the education, because what you've done is truly educational for a tremendous number of people, if they listen. When we talk about letting go, there are quite a few people, either in word or in the spoken language, who talk about the fact that many times depression is not being able to let go. It is a hyper-rumination of negative constructs from the past, as opposed to looking towards the future and what is potentially available. Certain Eastern philosophies talk about, metaphorically speaking, if you are not going to be flexible and bend like the reed, you in the strong winds, you will break. Okay. And so what you're referencing is cognitive flexibility. And I think that's really powerful. And I thank you so much for sharing your perspective and your story, so that other people can see that an individual like you, who had everything going for him. I mean, success, you had, capacities that people would dream about. You had a wonderful family. Out of the blue, this type of thing happens, and you worked your way through it, and you've come to a point where now you're helping others to do the same. Perhaps not even directly, some directly, but others in terms of passing on information. And I think you really do honor the name of Journey's Dream, because the idea here is, for some people, a dream. I wish I could get this done. I wish I could do that. But no, it's alive. It is a creature that is viable. It is something that anyone can access. And we are really, really blessed to have you on board today to share this whole thing with us, Mark. Mr. Wells, do we have any questions for Mr. Hattas?
We do. And an interesting one, when Mark, when you were talking about the resource hub that is Journey's Dream, and you talked about finding practitioners who can help someone achieve full or complete healing. We've had someone ask, how do you choose those practitioners? How do you find folks that do practice that more holistic approach? And then, of course, you also talked about some of the, not everybody does everything that, some people do bits and pieces, but how do you find folks to be part of your resource network?
So because of the nature of being a resource hub, online we don't direct people to any one in particular person. If someone asks us for recommendations or is looking and we're in conversation, we'll work with resources that that we're aware of and say, hey, you might want to check out this person. So far, there are two ways that we've found people. One is word of mouth, through our network. We've given lots of talks and interviews, and so people find us and they reach out to us and say, hey, I know somebody. We also inherited a group because one of our board of advisors had created a network for that intention, and they didn't want to maintain it any longer. So we actually partnered with her to bring those resources on. We don't do what I would call a vetting process. It's more of an honor system that we say, here's our philosophy. Do you agree with our philosophy? If you agree with our philosophy and you have resources and tools that can support that, and they have credentials that, validate that, then they can be in the network. But we're not doing exhaustive investigative work. If someone were to come to us and say, hey, I know someone, we would talk to you, and we'd be happy to engage with other resources that you might be aware of that could fit into the network. It's in the newer stages because one of the things that building something like that requires is an infrastructure. So we've been building an infrastructure in the nonprofit, but also in the for-profit side. So it's coming together, and I believe that at some point we will have a global database that will be really robust. It's not robust today in terms of any means of what I think it can be, but the intention is to continue to build upon it.
And Mark, I think somewhere between Journey's Dream and the network of psychologists and therapists that we're looking at as well, I think that we could probably get some people some help somehow, for most people.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Regionally, yes.
Absolutely.
So,
Another
there's always been, the only time I felt I was asked one time that I couldn't come up with a resource in an area, and it was out of the country, and we just didn't have access to resources. But with our network of who knows who, we've been successful in referring. Referring is probably the wrong word medically. We're not referring, but suggesting.
One of the other questions, Mark, that came in actually speaks to that whole concept of a global network. You mentioned that you're in the Chicagoland area. The assumption in the question that we got is that Journey's Dream is located in the Chicagoland area. How do you find folks, and how robust is your network outside of the Chicagoland area?
It's growing. We have, so our main resources are in Chicago, Michigan, Utah, and California. And so those would be kind of hubs out of which we know more resources. And that'll expand as we get volunteers. If the person who's asking the question wants to volunteer to help build it out, or if anyone's interested, it takes work. And we've streamlined it a bit to make it easier on the practitioners. Because one of the things, the practitioners are busy. And one of the biggest obstacles we found in reaching out to people is that people are so busy that being in another network isn't as interesting as we thought it would be, because they're already swamped with patients. I mean, it's the demand is extremely high.
Doctor, I'm sorry.
And it's going to grow. It's going to
Yes.
continue.
Absolutely. Yes. Dr. Mensah, the other questions that we have here are probably more suited towards you. You know, our regular viewing audience always has questions regarding biochemistry. And so we do have someone asking if there are certain biochemical imbalances that make people more likely to consider suicide or more likely to reach that level of depression.
Yeah, there are combinations of chemistries that can do that. You know, the one that really comes to mind, and Mark, the person that you spoke of in that story was a male, correct? The one who decided that
Yeah,
he's going to.
yeah.
Yeah.
Young, about 11 or 12.
I am very, very concerned for the over-methylated male. And for those who don't know what over-methylated means, we talk about this concept of a carbon atom with 3 or 4 hydrogens attached. It is like a Lego. It's a methyl molecule, and that molecule attaches itself to enzymes, hormones, neurotransmitters. It can literally control DNA expression, meaning your very core signaling piece, your DNA, is regulated by methyl molecules. Now, when you have too many of these methyl molecules, you can be very, very, very susceptible to depressive tendencies. When you have too few, you can also be susceptible to depressive tendencies. But here's the thing that I find very interesting from a personality trait perspective. Individuals who are low in these methyl molecules, undermethylated individuals, they may look at suicide as an attempt, but usually they're not successful. The overmethylated individuals, when they take that step, they're unfortunately usually quite successful. So when we look at people and they talk about suicide, one of the first things I do is I really do look at their chemistry. First, I'm very cautionary as it takes a moment of time before the test results come back. But when those test results come back, first thing I check is the methylation status, because that person who is overmethylated literally feels the pain in a way that most of us can't understand. It is at a cellular level. It is at the core of their being, and they are not wanting to move through this process for a very long period of time. That is that experience. They are what we call low histamine, overmethylated individuals. And while we're talking about that, this is the same group that is highly susceptible to pharmaceutical medications, especially the teenagers. Any pharmaceutical medication that is an antihistaminic medication, and most people don't know, SSRIs are antihistaminic at varying degrees, but they can further lower this histamine. And this one particular group, especially this group, can be the ones that get pushed into suicidal ideation. Atypical antipsychotics are the same way. Very, very powerful antihistaminics. So this is why we do our best to share with our colleagues who are ordering lab tests, who are our physician practitioner colleagues, to at least check the methylation status before providing medication at a pharmaceutical level. Because these individuals who are suicidal in particular, or who are low histamine, can be moved into a very, very, very dark place. Mark, kind of the way your person started is how these folks can move and end. So we're very cautionary about overmethylated people, in particular the males. Now, yes, females and anyone can become suicidal. There's not a question. But what we see in the trends are, with our own literally personal experience, in addition to how we were trained, is that these individuals are a highly, highly susceptible group. And so we watch for those who are overmethylated. And then if we have combinations, people have heard us talk about copper toxicity, for example. Individuals who have copper toxicity, and again, especially males, are very impulsive individuals. They have a thought and they act on it. So if we take an overmethylated person, add to it the additional insult of copper toxicity, now we've got a person who's very depressed and impulsive. So if they happen to be in that very dark place and they happen to have access to something that could be negative, they may just take that opportunity at a moment's notice to go ahead and try to end their lives. So it's not just one chemical imbalance is what I'm trying to illustrate. There are combinations that can make things very, very difficult. Many people who have multiple suicidal attempts are quite often undermethylated individuals. Now, if we take an undermethylated individual who is also copper toxic, then that person may have multiple attempts or not. I'm not saying this is hard, carved in stone. What I'm sharing with you are examples of where chemistry and environment meet, chemistry and circumstances meet. Now, if these same individuals had opportunity to speak to someone the way Mark has spoken to certain individuals, that takes things down a notch or two or three and can extend that person's future. We can't ever minimize the significance of a listening ear and a listening and caring heart in the lives of someone else. We never know how we touch someone just by a smile, just by a courtesy, or we never know the kind of destruction, the kind of devastation that we create with an ill-fated word. You don't know where this person has been. You see somebody walking down the street who's ticked you off and you say something ugly, mean, or nasty. You're not aware that this person may have had a brutal parent, may have gone through a life of PTSD, may have had a series of horrible relationships, may have had just lost their jobs, and you may be that final straw for that person. They can't take it anymore. Try the opposite. As Mark said, and I'm glad you brought this up, Mark, 90 seconds, the average experience of an emotion. And this is why we're often told, don't act during an emotional time. Take that deep breath, hold on, and let it pass, okay? But I digress a little bit here, Mr. Wells. Yes, so we do have certain chemistries. We watch out for overmethylation, undermethylation as well, things like copper toxicity. And on the other side, if you are pyroluric, have pyrrole disorder, a disorder which is that disorder of stress intolerance, that disorder that can go from 0 to rageful. Now, I think a lot of what we're seeing in the media right now is pyrrole disorder on steroids. We're seeing folks doing things that we've never seen them do in this country, let alone around the world. And how we're dealing with each other, how we are talking to each other, how we are experiencing the world, and vice versa, how the world is experiencing us, which now takes us to another point. I wouldn't be surprised if we've got pyrrole numbers that are so far off the scale that it's something that we just have never seen before in large, large numbers. I don't see how you couldn't be. Folks, pyrroles are susceptible to any kind of stress, whether it's environmental, social, physical, or physiologic. And right now we're going through a tremendous amount of stress. So when we combine poor stress tolerance to impulsivity to severe depression, watch out, okay? And this is why we're having these conversations. Mr. Wells, I'm going to stop pontificating at this point here.
Well, we've got one more question, Dr. Mensah, and it speaks directly to our central theme of coping with COVID. And that's a question that asks, is the virus, if people are exposed to the virus, could it be the virus that's making people physically more depressed, more susceptible to suicidal thoughts, that type of thing? Or are people simply reacting to all of the craziness that is caused by this pandemic, the social isolation, the economic and social hardships?
The answer is yes.
To both.
Absolutely. You know, when this creature comes out, and I've called it a creature for a variety of reasons, but if you're not one of those folks in the high-risk category who's going to transition and pass away from this thing, and I don't mean to be light about that, so forgive me, but if you say fit, you're a 30-year-old individual, 35-year-old individual, you're in great shape as far as you know, and you get this thing, well, one of the things that may happen is severe fatigue very early. Drains you physically, okay? You may get a cold or flu. Now, any of these variables is a stressor on the body. And that stressor causes pyrrole molecules to rise in number and depletes you of something very key, zinc. Now your immune system goes kerplunk because zinc is necessary for immune health. Zinc is necessary for DNA repair. Zinc is necessary for healing in a variety of ways, physical and emotional. Zinc is necessary to make your neurotransmitters, your serotonin. So if you can't make your serotonin, if you can't make your calming neurotransmitter, GABA, gamma aminobutyric acid, GABA, well, anxiety goes up. So you end up with this vicious cycle. Okay? If it's not a physical challenge and if it's not life or death, there's certainly emotional difficulty and trauma that happen as a result of it. And in the news, we've been seeing discussions around the longevity of side effects of challenges that happen as a result of being exposed to COVID. Some individuals are in healing for months, not just a few days, not a few weeks, months. We've seen medical bills skyrocketing. What's happening internally is a lot of stress, oxidative stress, inflammation, and emotional stress. And, you know, we're blessed if we've got family around to support us, but many people don't. So it becomes this swirling vortex of just downward spiraling. So we do have to be careful for a variety of reasons. It's not just about life or death. The consequences to both body and mind are horrific and extremely, extremely non-deferential. Anybody gets this. Doesn't matter who you are or what you are. And when it happens, it could care less if you're wealthy, poor, black, white, pink, green. It makes no difference. Okay? This is something that we need to be watchful for to protect ourselves in the best way we can, but to have available options and opportunity to talk to people. Because even after it's over, if you're doing well, great. But if you're not, if you're more depressed as a result of COVID exposure, if you've got anxiety as a result of what's happened, folks, seek out organizations like Journey's Dream. You know, contact your healers. Look for them. They're there. You just have to find them.
Well, to that end, Mark, can you share with our viewers how they might get in touch with Journey's Dream if they have need of some of the resources that you provide?
Yeah, the first place that I would direct people would be journeysdream.org to kind of explore, see what's out there. You're welcome to contact me directly. Mark@journeysdream.org is my email. And so if you want a human being to interact with instead of a website, I'm happy to engage anybody with questions or what have you.
Very good. And we will, when we post this video to YouTube, then we will include both the website and your email in the comments section. So folks, as you're watching this, look to the comments section or to the description of the video, and you can find that information. All right, that's all we have in the way of questions, Dr. Mensah. Any final words, anything you want to wrap things up with here?
I will keep this very, very brief. First of all, Mark, Mr. Hattas, I want to thank you so much for sharing with us your personal journey. It's not an easy one, but it is truly a light to be shared in the darkness. And folks, I want you to think about where Mark has been and how amazingly well he's done. He's living proof, and I do mean living proof, that things don't always have to go negative because you're experiencing an emotion, and at that moment, take a moment and look for those alternatives, look for help. And Mr. Wells, as always, I want to thank you for moving us through this process. And for everyone out there, it's a horrible, miserable time. But you know what? So long as we have each other, so long as we've got life, we've got hope. And that's what Journey's Dream and organizations like what we do and all of our psychologists and therapist friends all over the planet, literally, are trying to provide. We want to just share with you that there's hope out there. Don't give up. Find a good resource.
Absolutely, absolutely. Again, folks, we will be posting this video to YouTube. Also, we will post links to this video on the Mensah Medical Facebook page. So go to YouTube, type in Mensah Medical. You'll see a list of all of our past webinars, so you can watch it that way. We encourage you to share this information with your friends and family as well. Let them know about this incredible resource that we learned about today, so that if they are experiencing difficulties, they know where to find the help that is so readily available to them. Thank you all for watching. Thank you, Mr. Hattas. Thank you, Dr. Mensah, for your time. And we look to see you again next week. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark.